Hello everyone, welcome to SAW Dialogues 2022, presented by Art and Market in partnership with the National Arts Council Singapore as part of the 10th edition of Singapore Art Week. My name is Vivian Yeo and I am content producer at Art and Market. It is great to have all of you here with us at Gilman Barracks, and to those of you joining us online, welcome. On the screen now is a QR code that you can scan to access Slido for the Q&A segment. Feel free to type in a question at any time, and we will get to as many questions as possible at the end of the talk. If you are attending this online, you can also turn on the automatic live caption function by clicking on the CC button on your video player. I would now like to introduce the talk for this afternoon, titled A&M Salon, Art, Food, Design. A&M Salon is a gathering of creative individuals to explore art at the intersection of other disciplines. This session looks at the unexpected connections that have been found between art and food, fashion, and design in general, as well as the collaborations that bridge these porous worlds. The talk will be moderated by Nadia Wong, editor at Art and Market. Nadia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vivian, and thank you to our panelists today for joining us. Thank you, Yen, Kenny, and Elyn. And to all of you joining us online, I'd like to introduce this talk as the third session of A&M Salon. The first two talked about art alongside literature and architecture, and today, as Vivian introduced, we will be looking at how art is connected with food and design, including fashion. And I'm pleased to be speaking with artist Elyn Wong, Kennie Ting, Director, Asian Civilisations Museum, Peranakan Museum, Group Director of Museums National Heritage Board, as well as Wong Elyn, founder and designer of Stolen. Thank you very much for joining us, and let's start. We began the talk by looking at visual documentation of some of your projects. Could you tell us about how art and food, fashion, design intersect in your practices? Elyn, could you start us off by talking about how Stolen is a fashion and arts hybrid studio?
Sure. So we are talking pretty much about intersectional work here. And intersectional work is very intrinsic to how Stolen is run as a business. I want to say it's almost like our DNA, really, because I've always set out for Stolen to do that from day one. Even when I registered the company, it was that I put it down as fashion and arts. So from day one, I was very clear of that. So, and cross-disciplinary work has always been something that I've been pushing and I want to persist on doing for a long run. I suppose it all starts out from me as a personal, when I personally enter into fashion. Because fashion was a completely new discipline for me. I came in as an outsider. I was never trained in fashion, and everything was self-taught. So when I started the fashion business, I thought to myself, instead of trying to pretend to be a fashionista that I am not, maybe I can run the business with more honesty. I mean, I can design dresses, but I also, at the same time, have got other strengths that I've managed to develop in my previous career. So since I'm starting my own company, maybe I should embrace that and start to do projects that probably could come out in a form other than just a collection of clothes. So yeah, so basically Stolen started as almost like an extension of me as a person. So that's how it was birthed as a hybrid studio. And when I say hybrid studio, Stolen is really committed to doing both fashion, the fashion entity, and also the art side of things. Well, maybe let me briefly talk about the fashion entity of Stolen. Even when I launched the brand, I was very conscious about making sure that everything that gets presented, all the materials that get presented, sticks very loyal and very true to us being a fashion and arts, has a brand ethos. Everything needs to go according to that. So for example, like just like any other fashion brand, I have to do fashion shows. But all my fashion shows will never be just a runway. So typically, they tend to be like more artistically inclined and more experimental presentation. So even when I was presenting my brand, the very first concept photograph that comes out to introduce the brand, it doesn't look like a very glamorous Harper's Bazaar fashion shot with pretty girls wearing my clothes. That's just not how it was set up to be. So Stolen is meant to be quite true as a hybrid. So every single thing that presents needs to stick close to that. So that's for the fashion entity. So for the art side of things, even though Stolen is probably more known as a fashion label because that's our bread and butter, but honestly, the art side of things is what feeds our soul. So I have started Stolen Alliances, which is actually an ongoing project that allows me to do collaborative projects with artists, with designers, with creators in all forms. Basically, when I like them, I admire their work, and it's coming from respect. We'll hook up, we'll sit down, and we'll talk about ideas. Interestingly, there is no brief, there's no fixed brief. There's no certainty to what the end product will be. But there's actually one strict criteria, that is every collaborator that I work with for the Stolen Alliances project cannot come from fashion. So I can't be doing it with another fashion brand. Well, because the whole idea of me doing Stolen Alliances is for me to create beyond fashion. So I find that more refreshing, and it's more inspiring for me. And actually that sticks more true to what Stolen is about, which is a hybrid brand. So yeah, interestingly, and it's quite encouraging and really exciting because for Stolen Alliances project, which was kind of like an oddball for all other fashion brands, it became, it has grown. And through the years, it actually became much better, bigger, and more international, which is really encouraging for me. So like in the last few years, we started showing in international shows and more global exhibitions. It all started with more collaborative projects with my peers in Singapore, and that's all well and good, and even sometimes can be much better than international brands. But as you grow and you start to showcase in bigger shows, naturally, I also get to work with bigger brands, global companies. I mean, even one of them that I collaborated with actually have like 2 centuries of heritage behind them. I mean, like, that is mind-blowing for me. For Stolen to be working with someone of that caliber, I think, yeah, that's unbelievable where I am standing. So I'm glad that we kind of stuck to it and being a hybrid studio and doing this. And not only is it recognized, but it's celebrated on the international front. So it's a magical feeling, really.
Thank you, Elyn. I think it's amazing to see how the hybridity has been rewarding and Stolen has grown from strength to strength. I'd like to ask Kennie now how your work at the ACM and the Peranakan Museum explores these intersections as well between art and food or art and design.
Thanks so very much, Nadia. I'd just like to say, first of all, that it's such a treat to be here with Elyn as well as Yen. Usually, I am on these panels that are very academic and very, very museum-oriented, so it's very nice to be able to be dragged out of that today to talk about something else. At risk of being very cheeky, I'm going to steal a line Elyn said. You know, this intersections is also very much part of the museum's DNA, primarily because, you know, we're a museum of antiques and decorative art. So basically, if you look at the bulk of the collection, it's things like furniture, fashion, food receptacles, architectural elements, you know, and so from the very beginning, I think this idea that, you know, that is not just art, but also elements of food culture, dress culture, etc., that's been part of our programming. So you'd see at least that when we have sort of, you know, weekend festivals, when we have our sort of interactive programs for children and families, we always try to make sure that we have these elements here, food, etc., just to make sure that the objects in some ways come alive. So they're not just sort of objects in the showcases. I would say where it's slightly different for us recently was another intersection that we've started to explore, this intersection between the historic and the contemporary. So, of course, the bulk of our collection has been historic fashion, furniture, receptacles for food. But going ahead, one thing that we hope very much to explore more strongly is also the space of contemporary decorative art, so contemporary furniture, fashion, receptacles for food, and such. So this is sort of a snapshot of where we've been, and hopefully, we very much want to continue being in the intersections for the years to come.
Thanks, Kenny. And I think working at intersections means definitely collaborating with other individuals who know, I guess, their lane very well. And I want to ask you now, Elyn, about how this has allowed you to meet with other minds and what this has created for you that's been great for your practice. So maybe you could tell us about how your practice has involved looking at human interaction and intervention in urban environments. How have you explored the in-between space?
Well, in terms of working with people, I really do have to harken back to my parents, as we all do. They were actually biologists, but agriculturalists and food technologists as well. So there was always this expanded sense of interconnectedness, systems, networks, biological, man-made or otherwise. And from that, I've always carried that into my ideology and spirit of curation as well, where it's not about giving voice to one particular thesis. It's more about being like the farmer, not just growing crops, but growing good soil from which people of all different disciplines can work together. So for example, when it comes to a collaboration with not just artists in Singapore and New York, but also between artists and a commercial corporation like Lau Pa Sat, the Kopitiam Group, and NTUC, I think that is when it is more about how to set up a space and environment where dialogues can emerge very organically from a space of acknowledgement that, hey, we're all just together sharing a short time in this earth that we're on for a short while. So while we're here, what are the dialogues that we can germinate with each other through our crafts and expertise that we can offer to each other? So I just have to give a shout out to the NTUC group, for example, because when we went to them, it was very clear that they didn't just come into this project with this corporate mindset of, we're just venue managers. They cared about the intersections of food culture, how we define ourselves individually, collectively, across generations and across different cultures as well, like we have in the hawker center. But also with the artists, how they then looked at this project was also a crisscrossing of the different dimensions of using food as a prism for human relationships, communities, ways of transactions, and also how we work together in public space, i.e. architecture. It is about the metabolism that surrounds the idea of food itself. And that's why I just want to thank Art and Market as well. I've always loved your name because market is a language, it is a dialogue, it is about communicating value. And it's such a privilege to be on the same panel with people who have done so many collaborations and also who have the institutional point of view as well, because what you guys do is you expand the frame of reference from, like you said, a receptacle for food and object to larger longitudinal dimensions of time, history, collaborations between cultures like in Elyn as well, and industries as well. So I just feel really honored to be here today. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Elyn. That was really positive, and thank you also for acknowledging where Art and Market resides at intersections. I can see that all of you have great intentions of already working at intersections from the very beginning, and I'm just wondering, what else have you learned about working in intersections that have surprised you, that have brought rewards beyond what you had intended or anticipated? Maybe, Elyn, you could start.
What's really rewarding? Okay, can I just say, first of all, the most alluring part about doing intersectional work has always been the uncertainty in everything and undiscovered And basically, I really love how there is no perimeters, there's kind of no boundaries. That I find really mind-expanding and really worth investing time in. And so when a collaborator comes in and do that, every single step surprises me. And that pushes us to grow a lot more as creators. Yeah.
Kenny,
No,
you do so many collaborations, local and global.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I would say for me, it's kind of along the same line as Elyn said, but it's really that you know, I'm put into contact with all kinds of communities and people. You know, the museum traditionally is kind of like seen as a monolithic place. We're just like, it's us, we know better than you, you know? But I think the last couple of years, just allowing ourselves to be more open, working with students, working with various communities, it brings in new perspectives that we would otherwise not have. And new audiences as well. So last year, for the first time ever in my life, first time ever in ACM's life, we decided to have students from the SAL curate an exhibition on Singapore fashion. And I mean, the three big things that arose from that is, first of all, they brought in these sort of designers that we would never even have known because we're also old, you know? We really don't know. And these very exciting designers that for them, it's such a big deal because you get featured in the National Museum alongside very established fashion designers. That was one very important thing I felt was very meaningful. Secondly, then we have these like, you know, ACM generally, our visitorship tends to be older because we're an antiques museum, you know, like, you know, maybe 40s. But for this particular time when we had this show on, we had a lot of, you know, a lot of younger people coming in their 20s, which is also a very big thing for us because, you know, we too want to be, in our own way, be seen as relevant. So I think collaborations make us more relevant, I suppose, to sum that up. Yeah.
And what about for you, Yen?
I think in terms of collaborations, you know, firstly, thanks for pointing out uncertainty because it's such a big field and that's where all the potentiality lies. But with that, one thing which I've really appreciated is the learning experience when it comes to what this collaboration can open up, which is one, urgency, and two, generosity. How do you work together in a way that you open up yourself to other people's ideas to respond with immediacy to the conditions of our time and place, and to do so in a way where you facilitate in good faith, providing as many resources as possible, taking away any predetermined result which might hem in the collaboration itself, which closes that uncertainty to embrace uncertainty, to embrace sometimes the pain of the process as well, and to grow through it. So good faith, urgency, and generosity, those are the three things I take away from collaborations.
Right, and it sounds like the organic process has such wonderful rewards, right? It teaches us to let go, and then allows for whatever comes to come. There's no like one person solely responsible for the outcome. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So on that note, I would like to ask you guys about a recent or favorite project that's intersectional. Elyn, you want to talk about, I mean, you've done so many with Stolen Alliances, but maybe a most recent one or a favorite one that you'd like to talk about today.
Okay, when you asked that question, actually two projects came to mind.
Yep.
But let's talk about Meridian McLuck. That was one of the more recent commission work that I did for Underwall Paper Magazine for their handmade projects. Okay, handmade projects is essentially an annual project that they did to celebrate craftsmanship. Okay, so what they do is Wallpaper Magazine will reach out to artists, creators, fashion designers, industrial designers, people of all sorts, and then they'll give us a really intriguing brief. The year that I was involved in, the topic was wellness wonder. Wellness wonder, which like, you know, now everyone is a health freak and everyone is a yoga guru. So that was a very interesting topic then. So all of us take it away and then see it from our own perspective and work on it and come up with a proposal. So like a fashion designer can see this brief very differently from an industrial designer. So we all submitted our proposals, after which Wallpaper actually seeks out craftsmen from all over the world to see who is the most appropriate craftsman that can bring out each individual proposal to life. That is amazing. That, to me, is like a dream come true project, really. So I jumped straight into it, and the fun already started actually right from phase 1, which is, Wallpaper magazine is based in London. I'm in Asia. Most of our collaborators that's around the world, a lot of them are based in the US. So all of us have to then start working across 3 different time zones, having endless meetings over crazy hours throughout the day, which is fun. And then as discussion move on, ideas get changed, and logistics get sorted because we are all around the world, and then ideas have to change again. And because ideas change, collaborators end up changing quite a few times. So these are very typical and common issues which we have to embrace. So in fact, the very final proposal that I was writing and drafting was actually me on a plane, flying out on the way to meet my final collaborator in Germany. And I was just drafting it out and typing it out on the plane. And I'm on the way there to start on the production. And I was just thinking to myself, okay, I really hope this works because we are so behind time. And then once I touched down, my final collaborator is Villeroy and Bosch. There's VMB, this big company in Germany. So once I touched down, I went straight from the airport, straight into their factory, touched the material that I had in mind to do for my proposal. And of course, it didn't work. My proposal had to be thrashed out of the window. So we sat down and we had endless meetings to brainstorm, late night meetings with the new team of people. And, we just have to be forced to really think on our feet all time, every moment. And so I had to, because I was working with towels at that point for the project. So I had to personally take a 1.5 days crash course in their factory to learn from how to choose different materials, to how to color the towels, basically the whole process of towel making. And on the flip side, I'm sure, they will have to accommodate unreasonable requests coming from a fashion designer flying in from Asia, telling them, hey, what about exploring this way of making towels that you have never think of? It sounds quite disrespectful if I say it this way, but we really have to kind of come in a middle ground and work like that. So that was at that point when I was doing this and the meeting. It was at the point that I realized the best collaborator needs to be, we need to first and foremost have mutual respect for each other, no matter how famous or how unfamous you are. And second thing, I think we both have to have very, very open minds, like what you have mentioned earlier. And I think the last point, which is decisiveness. Decisiveness is quite crucial. So with these 3 things, we kind of make it happen, and we came up with a new proposal there and then, and it worked beautifully. And so much has happened within that. I was there for a week and a half. It was pretty crazy. But I remember, I have a very vivid memory of this. I sat in their castle. They have a castle. So VMB is a very established company of 200 years old. So they have a castle, and I was sitting there, and I was looking around this castle and thought to myself, you always hear people say, the destination is never as important as the journey. And at that moment, I'm like, this is what that means. Honestly, at that point, it really doesn't matter what the end product is, what we end up making. I've learned so much, I've grown so much, I've changed so much, I learned so much about myself. Everything was worthwhile. And so at that moment, it was also with very much clarity that I am so glad that I stuck to what I do for Stolen, doing projects that completely outside of our comfort zone. That was what brought me there, in this castle, doing this random project which is out of this world. Yeah. So and so every step was a big win for me already. So eventually, the project that we did, the end product that we did was this experimental installation piece. There's actually a reflexology path made from Villeroy and Bosch tiles, the same tile design that they first started with the brand 200 years ago, the very first tile design that was used in churches. So I've flown all this way to Germany, to the other side of the world. I really wanted to make this collaboration meaningful. So what I wanted was a real marriage of our Eastern and Western culture, a piece of work that is never done before, and because of us coming together is birthed. And also, to honor the project of handmade, I really wanted a marriage of design and craftsmanship. And it turned out beautiful. Like I say, it's already many wins for me, but I think the biggest and most memorable win for me in this project was the fact that I managed to make this 200-year-old company who has been making tiles their entire life try to make something which they have never attempted before. And we did that. I mean,
yeah, thanks, Elyn, for sharing that story. I think you threw out lots of lessons there that you learned, and I'm just like cognizant of how you guys were like nodding along with it. So, Kenny, maybe you can share how some of the lessons that Elyn learned in this journey resonated with you as well.
Yeah, I would echo Elyn in saying that the process is the most important. And to me, I think one of the, I would say the most important projects we've had for the museum, even though it's a pretty small one, was last year's exhibition called #SGFashionNow. It's a showcase of contemporary practicing Singaporean fashion designers. It's very small, but you know, for the longest time, I've always been scheming to do Singapore fashion, contemporary fashion. It's not quite in our scope because we're traditionally known as an antiques museum, and we are traditionally about Asia, not Singapore. So I thought, you know, some ways it sort of steps on other people's turfs quite a bit. Anyways, when I first proposed this to my board, they were like, huh? Like what? Why are you doing this? And it actually took COVID happening for them to, in some ways, say, actually, no, it's good because you need to work with the local community. And the community for us, the museum, would be artisans and designers. So I think since we decided that we would do this, and because we were flirting on multiple fronts, you know, like we flirted with the contemporary, we flirted with Singapore, but we also flirted with commercialism. So there were our members of our board who were like, don't you think you're coming too close to flirting with like commercial and so on and so forth? So what I did was I felt that I had to go and speak to people. So I spoke to quite a lot of people who, you know, folks who sort of, you know, had done fashion events, et cetera, academics, etc., to figure out what was the best way to do this. And then the recommendation was the museum should not do this alone. You should do this with the industry and with education. And so we landed, partly because of this, yeah, I can tell you why. Partly because of this. I remember one of my board members saying that, oh, you want to have students participate in the industry because you'll be asked, how come you pick this designer, not that designer, huh? So then we say, not I pick one, the students. You know, the design, the industry and the students themselves. And I think that process of eventually involving TAF, the Textile and Fashion Federation, as well as the students in LaSalle became the most meaningful. The students themselves actually changed us. I think that's quite important. Myself, my curators, we were at first a bit like, huh? What do you mean we let go of the curation? What does that mean? You know, huh? You know, but what if it's not at the tip-top quality? And then we had to sit down and think, that's not the point. The point is to not have it, you know, it doesn't need to be like perfect because we know that this is meant to be something that we do with the students and community. What's most important is that we are seen as a space of opportunity, that we are seen, you know, we are growing together. So I would say that as much as I felt so moved because the students had this opportunity to work with us and to showcase just how brilliant they are really brilliant. We ourselves, you know, we were blown away by how smart the students at LaSalle are. The first round took place last year. It did very well. So we're going to do a second round this year, again with the students at LaSalle curating. And the proposal from LaSalle, I can tell you already, it blew my mind. So that when I see a proposal before me like this, and it was so good, I was like, you don't worry, I'll find you the money. We'll do it. And it makes a huge deal. You know, Nadia's nodding away also because she's implicated in this. She's one of the professors at LaSalle.
So, actually, so I'm listening to Kennie talk and I'm nodding away because I was involved in that project because I teach at LaSalle as well. I was just thinking about how that's also at the intersection, right, between like students and the institution. And I know Circe Hannestrosa, who's the head of School of Fashion, she always tells the students, you have to, really be grateful for this opportunity, be appreciative because it doesn't happen. The fact that you see the proposal and you're like, I'll find you the money, I think that's such wonderful acknowledgement of their efforts.
It was so good.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to get you the money. That's brilliant, seriously. So I think ultimately what I felt was also that it's important to note that we have so much talent in Singapore, here, like right here even.
Yeah.
And we really have to come together to point that out.
Yes, and I think what's great about all of you sitting here is that you initiate these collaborations, right? And you give these platforms for people to come together, and that's really important. And I think this is a good point to go into what Yen is doing for Singapore Art Week. So you have this amazing project at Lau Pa Sat, which you mentioned a bit earlier already, called Hawker, which are co-curating with Oh Yam Chu. And could you tell us more about how this project came about? Because this is definitely art intersecting with food in a really unexpected location. Or expected, I mean, it's food, right? But, how does art go into Lau Pa Sat? Can you tell us more about that?
It's actually actually a really human experience. The difference between our experience as artists and curators to those who actually work within a company or institutional context is that we have very different accountability requirements, which is much less. So it allows us to be a lot more nimble, allows us to react to what's out there without that much runway. Like, we can be nimble. So we didn't plan to put anything for Singapore Art Week because it does anything which I hate more. Like, I cannot stand doing programming just for the sake of. I think it has to emerge, like ecologies emerge quite organically, And what was happening during that time, it was just catching up with Yam Chu, who was based in Baltimore now. His dad is a Karanguni man, used to run food stalls. Here I was in Singapore, going past all these empty hawker spaces, netted up, with ropes tied around it with tape. It was a different space. The absence was palpable. So this is literally us responding to the conditions of our time and place. And it's not about what we do now for Singapore Art Week, but rather what we do now in this time that we can look back in retrospect in 5 and 10 years' time and say, how did we respond to our situation? What did we have to say about it? How did we look forward from that place and time in this place where we had to deal with regulations, we had to deal with social distancing, we had to deal with stalls shutting down. And at the very basic level, it started off with this corny joke about why is coffee quiet? Because kopi tiam. And it was just so dumb. So the original title was Kopi Tiam Mai Tiam. That means Kopi Tiam, don't be quiet, to bring people back again. It was about the life force around hawker. The hawker center space, communal congregations, and how we share food with each other. Yeah.
That's really funny to me, the kopitiam. Okay, I didn't think about that because to me it just means shop, right, in Hokkien. But yes, it can also mean be quiet in Hokkien. Thank you for sharing that. And how did the participating artists embrace the intersection of art and food in the new works that they created for the project?
If you're going to talk, I think immersion is the key.
Okay.
It was not just about taking the trope of food, not just taking what can be Googled, what is presented in the outward-facing STB fashion, but to really go down to get to know what is going on. So we had the artists going there, forming connections and relationships with the hawker store owners. So you will see the different languages of what goes on in the hawker center. You will see how the hawkers kind of feel about their own craft themselves. It's not just about recipes. It's not just about... Then we had Alison Kuo, who is a Taiwanese American, and originally her idea was to deal with the aggregation of the identity of Singapore noodles. What the hell is Singapore noodles? But as she got to know more about what goes on in our local hawker centers, her work just became a lot more community-based, and it's going to carry on after Hawker as well. And I think that's a great thing hearing about what you guys were saying as well, because I think with anything that we do, in whatever context, it is about incubation, isn't it? Any work and any show which we put on is merely an iteration of who we are at that point in time, seen through where we are standing right here. So it's almost like a prism. But meaning can only be seen in retrospect, like what happened in Germany, like what happened with the shows here. Contemporary and commercial doesn't lack significance, because it is creating that meaning through actually responding to what's here now in a collaborative fashion. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point you made, that incubation, because it sounds like everything that you guys do is always just, that's the first of many to come, right? It's never like one and done. It's like you do stolen alliances, one project leads to the next. SG Fashion now, you have one and then the next. And then for you, with your artists as well, right? It's not like, okay, after Singapore Art Week, it's gone, because it's just the start of something beautiful. And I think another thread I want to pick up is the idea of learning new skills, because Elyn was talking about how you had to learn tile making, right, when you arrived at the factory. And Yen, I know that you created a fashion garment as well, right? Fashion garment, let's use that term a bit loosely here, but out of cleaning supplies. And I wonder what skills you had to learn to make that a reality.
I went back to my army days, so it was actually a ghillie suit. So it was, you create like a ghillie suit with netting based on like camouflaging yourself with like plants and foliage. But this time it was with mop heads and cloths. The real thing is how the suit is meant to perform in real life, and then that's going to be documented in a different way as well, to kind of look at our cleaning schedules, the things that we don't see. I think that's a great thing about storytelling. Sometimes it's about unearthing stories that we don't tell or we don't hear. Yeah.
And hearing all of you talk about your projects, I mean, it really doesn't happen in like one specific location. It can happen anywhere. And I wanted to just make a note of how something in your project was stolen, I heard. Not stolen, but like stolen from La Paz. Could you talk about that? Okay, I'm glad that you're laughing and not upset, because I think the usual reaction to something being stolen would be to, yeah.
This is actually the reaction of Aaron Chan, who did his master's in urban planning, and he did this ethnographic documentation of all the food centers in the industrial spaces all around Singapore. And when I told him all his boxes were cleanly swiped, like even the whole setup, it was quite elaborate, he just laughed, and he expected it, and he had backups and reserves, to replace the stolen ones. But at the same time, once again, if it's a circular economy that we are talking about, then like Elyn, you laugh and you said that's the greatest form of flattery. We all just laugh about it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Elyn, I think you did this really wonderful multisensory presentation for your Zhua collection, which was, I think, the last major presentation you did before like all the restrictions came about with crowd control. So could you talk us through that a little bit?
Okay, so Zhua was actually one of my fashion collection. Zhua is a collection that's inspired by my trip to Bhutan. So the whole concept was sparked off because of when I arrived in Bhutan, I was blown away by how quiet the whole country is. So the silence of Bhutan was the main inspiration. I wouldn't say the silence per se, but it's because of the silence, I realized that all my other senses got extremely heightened. So the way I taste become different, my sight, touch, and smell, everything was heightened, and I was experiencing something very different in my life. It was quite out-of-body experience in some way. So because the whole inspiration was such a sensorial thing, which is very different from how I used to come up with concepts for my past collection, so I thought the most reasonable or the most natural thing for me to do was to kind of bring all this back for my clients who is going to look at my new collection. I want them to feel all these things. I want them to smell everything I smell and taste and touch and feel the Bhutan that I felt. And actually, that's exactly what I did. So I came back. So this is not a Stolen Alliances project. This is just how I did one of my fashion shows. So at the fashion show, what I did was I actually got a scent maker to concoct the scent. I worked with him days and weeks and months to come up with the exact scent that I smell when I was in Bhutan. So the scent was used in the entire area, the venue. And I've also went and looked for dry leaf and haystack. I tested many, many different ones that whatever I can get from Singapore and Malaysia then, and I flew in some from China as well, to actually lay the whole entire venue with the dry hay to recreate the same ground that I stepped on every single day when I walked back into my hotel in Bhutan. Because it sounds a bit silly, but as I walked onto that ground and it felt so soft, it actually made me feel very grounded, and it was a very different feeling. So I wanted to give that. I've also flew in a Bhutanese chef from Bhutan, and he hand-carried all the fresh ingredients from Bhutan to create all my favorite dishes that made an impression on me when I was in Bhutan. So all the very distinct taste of Bhutan that you can never get in Singapore. And I did that. So for the music as well. Remember, this concept was inspired by the lack of sound. So I'm like, okay, I'm very uncomfortable with them creating music for this. It feels almost wrong to have music for this when I'm inspired by the silence. So what I did was, I got my really talented music friends, Victor, to actually recreate instruments that uses things from Bhutan that I hear. I was sitting in this temple and I hear this very beautiful wind chime, and I heard someone play an instrument using seashells, and I hear a lot of singing bowls. So just elements like that. He actually took all these things, he made new instruments out of all this, and he created the music for the show using all this. So basically, the music for the show is the ambience that I hear when I was in Bhutan the whole time. And I was very lucky to also find this Bhutanese singer who's actually residing in Singapore. And I was so excited when I found her. I'm like, you have to sing for me. Can you please come? And I told her there's these 2-3 traditional songs. I don't understand what they mean, but I remember them when I hear them. And she said, yes, they're religious songs, and she knows how to sing it. So I said, yes, can you please sing that for me? Oh, okay, a sidetrack, a little story. So I was so excited that I found this girl. Immediately, I said, you have to perform for me. And immediately, she was excited. She's like, yes. But only to find out that on the actual day that my performance day, she was actually working. She works for this Korean barbecue place in Singapore. So the boss refused to let her go for the one day for my show. And so I actually went to the Korean barbecue place for a few days, waiting outside the shop to beg the boss to please let her come to my show. And I offered to work for her for free for a week, just in exchange for that one day. Things we have to do. Huh? So yeah, and then that happened. So basically, yeah, the music, the singing, the what I felt and how I smell and things that I taste, I basically transport the whole Bhutan back into Singapore. And I allow my audience to feel the collection rather than see the collection. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I mean, I was at that presentation, and it has made such a deep impression on me. And I want to pick up on the fact that you said it engages all your senses, because it did that, I think, for everyone who was there. It felt so immersive. And I wonder whether you guys think that working at intersections necessarily means immersion in some way, whether for the collaborators or for the audience experience. Kenny?
No, I was going to say, actually, I mean, I think the human beings are multi-sensual creatures, right? I mean, we consume messaging in multiple fronts. But I think in Singapore, we tend to be a bit literal and literate. So we tend to look at words. So, sometimes I get complaints in the museum that you don't have enough text. And I'm like, but that's not the point. When you step into the museum, and I'm very particular, like Elyn, about design, the exhibition design, the overall feel of it, that communicates something. And that sense of the visual and the sensual and the tactile and scent, it's primal. It gets right to your heart. It gets right to, you feel something so much stronger than necessarily words on the page. I don't want to disparage writers, but you know what I mean? I think we overemphasize sometimes on the textual rather than sort of the visual and the, I don't even know how to describe it, all coming togetherness.
Yeah.
And I think that bit, when it's done really well, and it's just fantastic. And I think that we can do it very well in Singapore. Generally, I would say we're quite good at that.
I think I get where you're coming from, because I think we want to be told how to think or how to feel, right? And we're uncomfortable when we're just given a blank slate, or just be like, you experience for yourself, you come to your own conclusions. How do you feel about that, Yen? How have you tried to maybe circumvent that problem? Or maybe how have you contributed to that problem through your own projects as well? I don't know.
It depends on how much convenience I want for myself and the audience. One thing which I do feel about our local audiences, I'd like to ask you guys working with other overseas audiences as well, is that in Singapore, there is such a premium placed on explanation and understanding. We need to know the answer to things before we actually experience things, without realizing that meaning, experience, and form co-emerge together and inform each other. But to do that, we need to open ourselves up to just experiencing. And I'm wondering now, apart from exhibition design, is there another way where we can almost prime audiences to really be quite equanimous about the unknowing, about not having that full stop, about not having that 10-year series answer, about this is the correct way to understand things? Because intellectual scaffolding is safe, it's comforting, it's like a cocoon. But at the same time as well, if I'm a little bit more of a jester and a trickster, I like to take it away and take that risk, because now in Singapore, it is still a risk. The first thing that people want is to be held by the warm embrace of wall text and exhibition essays. So in a sense, I hope it's a prompt and a challenge for programmers in the future as well, to change the rules of engagement and the rules of experience as well.
I absolutely agree with you there. I mean, at the ACM, I hate linear narratives. I hate it. I don't like the idea that there is one way to go through an exhibition. That's just dreadful. Life isn't like that. So actually, in a lot of our design, I actually draw a lot from fashion runways and theater, where the one thing, literally this is a must, I tell the curators and exhibition designers, there has to be one point in the exhibition which is gasp-inducing. So when you walk through and you turn a corner and you see that vista, and that's how you know an exhibition is successful. And I'll tell you why it is successful. People pay to come back. Seriously. And everything else, generally, I feel, people don't care so much. And Singaporean audiences, I think, sophisticated enough to know where something is just like, this is great, this is beautiful. Like when you go to a fashion show and experience, you know. And I think there's something profound about that. You cannot express it in words. There's nothing to explain about it, because it's a primal feeling. You're looking at something that is wondrous and it takes you out of yourself. And then the rest of it comes.
Got it. I'm just going to go ask one more question before we get into the audience's questions. If you'd like to ask one, whether you're here with us at Gilman or whether you're online, you can scan the Slido code on screen right now, and we'll get to your questions shortly. So I wanted to ask, I see that this intersectional work has really given you a lot professionally, and I'm wondering whether it has also fed you in some way personally, whether it's your own projects or looking at other intersectional projects. Yen, you can start us off.
Actually, one of the most fulfilling projects I did was the most informal one, which was actually a housewarming. This 42 artists, some of them which are exhibited here, like Anthony Chin's installation works. He was one of the artists there. So imagine a HDB flat, and you've got artists like Desiree Tham, who's currently working with Feng Shui. She created like thousands of fresh tang yuan balls and exhibited in an actual fridge with the door front changed as a display. Or Adeline Quay, who is showing in other exhibitions at Singapore Art Week. What that taught me was that it is about filling niches in the ecology of ideas, finding out where our place is, either as companies, public trustees of objects and the arts and dialogues, or as individual collectives of artists and creators and scientists and musicians and writers, and how do we come together and support each other by breaking context, allowing people to break out of their current practice and spend time. I think really it's spending time with each other. That is what creates that relationship where ideas emerge, not predetermining outcomes, but once again, respecting process. Yeah.
I like that you've identified an element of play that comes through, right? And that's, how children learn. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that in doing our 10-year series where it all went wrong. But then, I think intersectional work allows for that playful element to come through again, and it can create really wonderful surprises. What about for you, Kennie? How has intersectional work, fueled you personally?
I think, fundamentally, in real life, I'm actually very boring. I write books about port cities. But I think port cities like Singapore, like, places like Hong Kong, Mumbai, Jakarta, Bangkok, etc., they're fascinating things because, they're at the intersection of so many things, right? As ports, we have people that come from all over the world. Goods, ideas, cultures. And so we're at the intersection of cultures. There's old and new constantly because it is in port cities historically and today in Singapore that you have innovation. New things are invented, old things are consumed. And then, so to me, I think that like by nature, because I'm interested in port cities in general, therefore this idea of intersections I feel is very important. And in the museum world, at least, up until very recently, it's changing. We tend to curate in silos. So it's always like specific genres or, specific regions, because we're an Asian Art Museum, like East Asia, West Asia, etc. But I feel that that was never relevant. Because if you look at this question of port cities and flows of people and goods, you will see that all of us, historically, human beings have always been interacting and, enriching each other. We've always been sort of east and west, like what you say. And what I find amazing is the fact that we continue to do that today. And particularly in a place like Singapore. And so that's what excites me, the fact that in Singapore specifically, there's so much potential to be at the intersections. And that's something I feel we should push more of, across genres. Art plus whatever. So this is amazing what is happening here today.
I think that's really nice to hear because, there are these natural hybridities that happen because of where we are, our own history, right? And we should embrace that. Elyn, what about for you?
More or less the same, but I wanted to add on what you just said. Like, geographically, actually, Singapore is in an ideal place, almost naturally, that we are forced to do this intersectional. We are forced to have intersectional mindset, basically, to start off. Interestingly, when I was first showing Stolen in the US, this is many years ago, over 10 years ago, and we have international buyers from all over the world coming to look at our work. And not one person could guess where I'm from, looking at my work. Because, like what Kennie said, we are such a mix of East and West, new and old, that strangely, this special position of ours initially in the last few years gave a lot of artists and creators this lack of identity. It's like, what are we? We are nothing. How come we are not this? How come we are not that? But I actually, personally, I see that as such a big plus. I see that as almost like the future of everyone. We have just arrived first. Everybody's answer to our lack of identity is always, we are just 50 years old, so we are very young. So, it takes time we have thousands of years for other cities, therefore they have a very clear identity. I mean, yes, that is definitely valid, but I would like to think we are not 50 years young, we are 50 years ahead of people. We are such a melting pot in ideas and all forms that eventually everybody will be creating and thinking and living like us, really. Yeah.
I love what you just said because, I feel that our friends in STB don't like that, but we know who we are.
Thank you for that, Elyn and Kenny. I have a number of questions coming from the audience. I'm going to jump right into them. I really like this one question that asks, how do you consciously include the nuances of each discipline and avoid surface-level connections when you're doing intersectional work? I think that's such a valid question to ask because it's so easy to just kind of connect them in a superficial way. How do you personally avoid that in your own work? You can talk about it through a project that you've done, I guess. Kenny?
I can go first. I think the simple answer is to involve the people, the makers and the artisans themselves. So it's so it's not just about representation. It's actually about ensuring that we understand the process behind making as well. So I think to me it's very important that the actual sort of makers, the artisans, the communities themselves are involved. Yeah, that's the simple answer for me.
Yeah, I think that's great to hear. I mean, and to make sure that their voices are heard, right? And I think, as we've already said many times here, that they are allowed to have their voices heard. No one is really in charge. And I guess allowing for some chaos within the structure. So one other question we have here is, how has digitalization impacted your exploration of other disciplines, like in a positive way or in negative ways even? Elyn, you were talking about all these like online meetings you've been having as well, right? So maybe you can speak about this.
I'm really old school. I hate digital. So I have never included like digitalization in the actual final product of the work because it doesn't move me as much. But I'm sure digitalization aid me in the process of making, in the process of the whole merging two minds and thinking at the same time and doing research and all these things. But to me, it wasn't very vital for my actual final end product. I'm not sure about everyone else.
I'll take the penultimate thing that Kenny, you said about acceptance and expand that to answer the last two questions. Firstly, in terms of digitization, it really is about accepting the form for what it is. But linking that back to the previous question, I always take the idea of labels of discipline as like medical diagnoses. These words are only as useful as they are a guide to future action and how they shape our expectations on how to work moving forward. But they don't define the content or the form, the content, and the meaning of the reality underneath that label of the discipline. So firstly, take away that label of scientist, writer, and encourage the breaking of form, which then goes on to online. Now we're so used to certain online forms, the forms of the Zoom meeting, the dialogue, the interface. I would say take out the idea, always question your assumptions of the interface, including that of the museum as well, because nowadays people experience 50% of a show before they step into a gallery or the show. People would have seen Hawker Hawker without seeing Hawker Hawker, for example. And so just take away the labels and then treat data and digitization for what it is. And always ask, what form are you perpetuating? What form are you going to break, including the forms of relationships and collaborations as well?
Well, thank you for that. Kenny, you wanted to add? Yeah.
I was just going to say, oh my God, I hate Zoom meetings. Don't even start. I've got a whole week of that next week, right? So, but I tend to agree with both of you guys because I feel like, in some ways, digitization is something we've had to do. In any case, but I believe firmly that there is something more to the physical experience, the visceralness of being, I don't think we can see everything. When you see it on the screen versus when you come in and you see your wonderful work in the context of the I would like to say the space, the sort of the riotousness of La Paz. There's a different feeling to it that you cannot capture, and I think people want that. That's why, the parks were so busy during circuit breaker. All these people like stopping people from going out. And then actually we had shows, we had a Russell Wong show. It did pretty well, given that there are no tourists. Singaporeans went and they paid to go in. So I think we are human beings. We want some kind of physical experience and physical contact with people. Yeah, I can't wait for this Zoom nonsense to end. I'm so done. And it's impossible to work looking at pieces over Zoom. There's no way.
Sure. What about for you? In terms of like working at intersections and working on digitization, I really like what Yen said about how it's just labels. We need them because we need to make sense of the world, but we can just as easily like revise them or even discard them if they don't serve our purpose, right? They are not meant to be barriers. And in some ways they can enable us to be braver in how we, re-explore them. I think I would like to now ask the last question, which is more forward-looking. What is coming up for all of you? And, if you could just talk more about how that's at the intersection of what you've already explored or, new frontiers you're trying to conquer, that would be great. Elyn?
I have quite a number of projects on hand right now. Forever too much on hand. But one of the more interesting ones is launching this year. I'm working with Phoenix, which is a company that does laminates. Absolutely nothing to do with fashion. Again, for this project, I'm going to explore building on some stuff that is a cross between fashion, arts, and furniture. So that's quite exciting. But if you're talking about the much further foreseeable future, I don't have the opportunities now, but I've always fantasized about building a stolen house.
Love it.
So, what will a stolen house be and how different it can be from a normal home? So, random.
Nice. And Kenny, Peranakan Museum is reopening, right? You wanna?
Yeah. I guess, we have a couple of things that are going on this year, but I think the biggest one, the most anticipated, is the Peranakan Museum. And in a similar way in which I've been sort of testing the boundaries with ACM, I'm going to push the boundaries a little bit with Peranakan as well. The definition of it. For one, the Peranakan community can be very vocal about a lot of things Peranakan. They may or may not like how the museum is going. For sure, we're making it a bit more inclusive to include other Peranakan communities like the Jawi Peranakan and the Chetty Malacca or the Indian Peranakan. We're also taking a more decorative art approach too. So instead of, last time used to be more ethnographic, the weddings like that, death is like that. Nope. So it's going to be more decorative art based. So we have 3 key themes: origins, home, and style. Almost like Zara, That's sort of like people.
Okay.
So it'll be I think the idea is to be a bit more relevant and contemporary. So we're working also with artisans locally and abroad to commission contemporary pieces based on Peranakan culture. The idea is to say that Peranakan culture is not dead, it's living. And the idea, there's a lot of batik in Peranakan culture. So I think one of the things I'm trying to do is also to make batik sexy again. Everybody should be in batik by the time Peranakan Museum opens. It should be the new thing in fashion. Yeah.
I like this energy of this panel about like pushing buttons. If there's one thing that Jean Tan said about the bicentennial, which is the success of the event would be determined by how many questions it sparks off, how many dialogues it starts. And I think this panel shows like projects that actually have that spirit of being a magpie, always kind of like pushing those buttons. To go against the grain, the next project I have is with part of Michael Lee's Workshopables, talking about moving forward as communities of artists. How do we change the way we relate to each other in this sort of circular skill-sharing economy, rather than the usual forms of public patronage in Singapore by the National Arts Council, which we are always thankful for. And then after that, there's a show which starts talking about silence. After all the hullabaloo of Singapore Art Week, how do we treat back? How do we be by ourselves? But on a more personal note, the most exciting thing which I'm thinking of is actually a very quiet, personal working together with Kalang Momin GRC, where there have been certain, I think there have been certain demographics that have been overlooked, the elderly, and how do we expand the canvas of art to not just have artists make work, but to have the community treat their neighborhood as their canvas to expand the ideas and the spirit of what art is, and what is the idea of making, what's the idea of making together. So yeah, I'm looking forward to those things, yeah.
Thank you very much, Yen. I really love how, we've really explored the idea of curiosity, because I think that underpins all of your practices. And also this belief in friendship, right? Whether it's existing or potential friendships that can be made through these projects. So thank you so much for a most wonderful discussion. I think everything you've shared has left our audience enraptured, and I thank you for that. So over now to you, Vivian, to close off the SAW Dialogues. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for spending your afternoon with us today. And thank you to the moderator, Nadia, and to our panelists, Elyn, Kennie, and Yen, for the conversation. If you would like to find out more about all the talks in SAW Dialogues 2022, please scan the QR code on screen now. All recordings of past panels are available for viewing on SAW Digital. And do also look out for the summaries of each panel, which will be released on artandmarket.net, where we share key takeaways. Before you go, we would also like to invite you to complete a survey towards improving the program for the next Singapore Art Week. I'll give you a moment to scan another QR code on screen. When you have completed the survey, you can take a screenshot of the submission page and show it to the info booths at Gilman Barracks at blocks 9 and 47 to collect complimentary SAW 2022 merchandise. SAW Dialogues 2022 is presented by Art and Market in partnership with National Arts Council Singapore. Thank you.